responding to the recent aid cuts.
Thank you. So you've been commissioned by the British Red Cross to give us some insights on this topic of the aid cuts and the impact of the system on the global humanitarian aid system. The intention here today is to set the stage for the conversation that the members of the ICG will have on moving forward with the IFRC's management action plan that came out of the meeting we had in Geneva in December. So yeah, please do give us your bird's eye view on your emerging findings on what's happening in the broader context in which we're working right now.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'll start with the big picture funding situation, and then I'll run you through three main ways in which the humanitarian community has responded. And I'll finish with some suggestions on where the movement can use its comparative advantage to make improvements and how it can influence the future direction of the humanitarian system. So let me start with a few facts and figures about the cuts. So 63% of humanitarian funding in the past has been provided by USAID, Germany and ECHO. USAID alone gave 43%. So we've been living with a mammoth over-reliance on three top donors. And the impact of USAID cuts has been brutal, felt right across the system, especially by NGOs and their partners due to their reliance on project-based funding. And US NGOs have been worst hit. CRS, for example, may have to cut by 50% this year. The biggest hits amongst the UN agencies have been taken by UNHCR, IOM and WFP. And for the Federation, the USAID funding amounts to between about 10 to 15% of the overall budget. And so programs across all the strategic priorities have been impacted, and over 70 national societies have been affected one way or another. And now, of course, as we know, cuts to aid are happening across the board. Here in the UK, we're reducing spend to 2.5% of GDP by 2007, aiming for 3% by 2033. The Netherlands plans to trim $1 billion from its development aid over 5 years. Germany are making $1 billion cut to the humanitarian aid budget, including a 50% reduction in life-saving activities. Switzerland cutting aid and increasing its defence spending, allocating 13% of its foreign aid budget to Ukraine alone. And Belgium is cutting its foreign aid budget by 25% over 5 years. So here what we're seeing here is a shift towards securitization, which is only likely to deepen. In the last couple of years, conflicts rose by 48%, IDPs rose by 13%, and the number of countries measured as high severity rose by 43%. So just to give you a bit of context, this means that if aid to Ukraine and donor refugee costs here in the UK are maintained at 2023 levels, this alone would swallow up 38% of total UK ODA. On top of this, there are big unknowns about how much ODA will be available in the future. For example, we don't know whether the current US administration will meet its commitments to multilateral institutions, like President Biden's pledge for replenishing the World Bank funds for the poorest countries and commitments to the African and Asian development banks. So all in all, we're witnessing a dramatic unfolding of consensus values and norms away from targeting aid to the most needy toward allocating on the basis of migration management and securitization. And this is deepened by falling demand for humanitarian aid as China, Russia, UAE and Saudi Arabia offer a new range of security partnerships. Not a great picture. Broadly speaking, the international system is responding to these cuts in three ways. And the first is the reset, which is led by Tom Fletcher, and this involves slimming down the very cumbersome coordination architecture, which includes the humanitarian program cycle, the humanitarian needs overview, the GF 2.0, which aims to improve needs assessment, creating a demand-led model through the flagship initiative, and acting on the IDP and protection reviews. And then aligning all of that with the SURF and country-based pool funds to harmonise the entire package. And there's some talk of merging some of these reforms, which sounds simple when you say it, but it's going to be very tricky in practice. There's also talk of making the IASC leaner by merging some of its internal groups. And the UN focus will be on the severest crisis, and cash-based responses are highlighted as a key modality. Now, I took some soundings as to all of this during the recent HNPW event in Geneva. And I must say, I detected a high level of cynicism. And people felt that the UN is not good at reform, and it felt very much like more of the same. So the architecture has not changed, and there's very little sign of reimagining a new system. Now I can just share with you that this wasn't helped by an OCHA keynote called The Future of the Humanitarian System, in which Amazon Web Services featured prominently. There was much disquiet that a platform had been given to one of the richest companies in the world, and the sense that the UN had scored an own goal on that one. Nevertheless, people were very positive about Tom Fletcher, but it does remain to be seen whether he can articulate a new humanitarian narrative to provide the kind of galvanizing leadership that can unite the system. But on the plus side, everyone agreed that less UN and more cash were both very desirable. Second response is from the Grand Bargain, who are positioning themselves at the core of the crisis as a broker between donor and agencies. And I'm quoting them, using their own words there. And this is all about accelerating the ongoing Grand Bargain commitments that we all know about, including flexible funding, cash, localization, accountability, risk sharing with partners. So I also canvassed some opinions at the HNPW event about this and got a pretty similar reaction. People felt that the Grand Bargain was feeling rather tired due to the lack of progress made over the last 10 years. And people were asking me, you know, what's going to change now given the same constraints that have been there for 10 years are still in place? Having said that, the ambassadors and the top brass of the Grand Bargain met very recently, a few days ago, to put their plan into operation. And in theory, the platform, the Grand Bargain platform, is well positioned to do this because it is the only system-wide forum in the sector. And colleagues at the Secretariat told me the meeting was positive, but we'll have to wait and see if acceleration of commitments is really going to happen. One thing I did notice at the HNPW event was the lack of donor representation, and it seemed like they were playing their cards quite close to their chest. On the positive side, everyone agrees that flexible funding brings major benefits to agencies and national partners, and the evidence base for this is getting much stronger. And of course, cash has already proven its feasibility and its viability. And the third area, the response to the cuts, is about creating new financing arrangements linked to the mutual aid movement. And the aim here is to plug the funding gap to create a more diverse funding base and make localized aid a reality. I must say that much of this felt fresh and new, and from what I could see, it's moving really quickly. And just to provide a bit of perspective here, remittances, for example, make up the lion's share of non-government funding for less developed countries. So the zakat system, the Islamic zakat system, is about 3 times more than ODA and 10 times as much as philanthropic flows. But even though philanthropies and foundations won't fully plug the gap, they can certainly help, and they really are reaching out now to humanitarian agencies. And I saw an example of this at a recent event in Geneva recently, hosted by the Vitol Foundation, who were giving money to several crisis-hit countries. 95% of that money is going directly to local actors, and there are many other examples in addition to this. And of key importance here is that the funding is linked to the mutual aid movement, which I can see is gaining momentum. as the evidence base for its viability becomes stronger and stronger. And alongside this, there's renewed energy for new ways to finance the system, such as the Humanitarian Liquidity Facility, which offers short-term overdrafts and loans to agencies. There's more emphasis on blended financing, accessing the private sector, online approaches like crowdsourcing, and engaging with donors from the Gulf states. So what we may be seeing here is the gradual emergence of a new financing system, not to replace international donors, but to complement them and provide more security for future shocks. So they're the three broad ways in which the system is responding. So what are the implications for the Federation? Well, my consultations affirm that the movement, in theory at least, is very well positioned to engage with and influence the future direction of the humanitarian system. And there are four main areas that I want to focus on. First, the movement and the ICRC in particular have a fundamental role to play in reaffirming the importance and relevance of humanitarian principles. It's clear that multilateralism is breaking down as we enter an era of more, not less conflict. And what's particularly disturbing is how recent conflicts have not been ended by a peace agreement, but by one party prevailing and overwhelming its opponent. And the UN has been largely invisible. IHL is being flouted in Gaza, Ukraine, Myanmar, to name a few. And the Security Council is bypassed when it comes to resolving conflict. So it's a rather dire situation that the wider system, I think, is looking to the movement to provide some leadership on this. Secondly, the movement's huge volunteer base is seen as by many people as its USP and its comparative advantage. And someone said to me that before the cuts, the volunteers were there, and they will be afterwards as well. And I noticed from the midterm review of the movement strategy, which I've been reading, it cites volunteerism as the second most important issue after climate change. So outsiders see the volunteer base being perfectly positioned to deliver localization and to support the mutual aid movement. And third, the movement is seen as a key player in cash-based responses. As we know, the Red Cross pioneered early cash trials in Guatemala, Nicaragua, and other countries in the late 1990s, as well as publishing the first research report on the viability of cash in 2000. The benefits of cash are now well proven, and the movement has the opportunity to build on this pioneering spirit, bring cash to scale, and make a real difference. And finally, there's a clear opportunity to harness the energy around new forms of finance by engaging with philanthropies and foundations, both an international and a domestic level, and also to advocate to traditional donors to give flexible, unearmarked funding wherever possible. That's quite a lot to digest. In just a few sentences, I'm going to summarize what I've just said. So, the system's moving away from targeting the most needy toward allocation for migration management and securitization. And this looks like it's very likely to continue. The top humanitarian leaders have responded to the crisis, but currently there's a rather negative narrative around the reset and the grand bargain. Where we have unanimous agreement is on the benefits of cash and flexible funding. More positive energy is being generated by efforts to transform humanitarian financing and enhance mutual aid. And finally, the Federation clearly has a role to play and is well positioned to influence a changing system in the ways that I've just mentioned. So that's me done. Thank you very much for listening. Back to you, JP.
Thank you, John. Since it's going to be a gathering of the members of the ICG as representatives of their national societies, what would be your invitation or challenge to them as they meet at this point in time, given the context that you've just outlined for us?
I think off the top of my head, the challenge is to do with courage and bravery, because I think that there is a consensus view about what needs to be done. But it's very difficult. There are institutional and organizational barriers and constraints that get in the way. And the challenge is to unite around what needs to be done and really address those internal constraints that make life continue as normal. That's the number one challenge, I think.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, John. No doubt this will continue, and we'll be looking forward to hearing more about what you surface in your investigations. So thank you. Thanks a lot for setting the stage for this conversation, and looking forward to connecting soon again.
JP, thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity.